No, I'm going to do the introduction. Tonight's program is with Scott Harris. It's RaptorQuest, Chasing America's Raptors. And that's Scott Harris that you see pretty much predominantly right there on the screen, like you saw on our screen. And he spent 17 months chasing 53 Raptors across 34 states. His version of a Raptor Big Year, RaptorQuest, is about his adventures, misadventures, successes, and failures. From minus 36-degree days to days over 100 degrees, to just getting on the bird just in time, to the frustrations of missing one by minutes. I guess we've all been there. It's about the birds, of course, but it's also about the people he met, the things he learned, and why he's already working on his next adventure. Scott and his wife, Randy, they retired to South Carolina, which is where they currently live. He used to live in California, so he's one of the few Californians that drove through Texas and didn't stay. It was also when he discovered birding, a hobby he never expected to love, but knew now can't live without. They sold their longtime home and business that they shared, Mustang Marketing, and which they ran for 35 years. And I'm going to kind of now they live near their children and grandchildren in South Carolina. Scott was a syndicated newspaper columnist and hosted 2 weekly radio shows, co-hosted a weekly Dodgers booth show with his son Justin, and he served on numerous boards, including Boys and Girls Lacrosse Club, United Way, and several universities. Just before moving, Scott was named Man of the Year, and his company had previously been honored as Business of the Year. His hobbies include collecting travels with Charlie Davis. Is that Charlie Davis?
That's read his Steinbeck's book.
Oh, Charlie Steinbeck's book, okay. And additions and playing blues harmonica and writing, having authored over 50 books in the past 8 years. So this is his latest book, and I'm sure he will share with us, if you're interested in possibly finding out where to buy them. And go ahead. I will now switch it over. I've already made him co-host. To the people that are watching, please turn your cameras off. That way the number of people at the top of the screen will kind of disappear. Thanks all.
All right. So, well, good evening, everyone. Let's see if are you looking at the cover of the book?
Yes, we are.
All right, excellent. Then we're rolling. We're rolling. Yes, and I apologize for not staying when we drove through Texas. I was actually down there again last month in San Antonio and up in Dallas. So I do visit Texas frequently. I love it. And I want to say thank you to everyone for having me here tonight. Thank you guys for being here. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm excited to share my adventure. And it is about the book, and it is about the photos and the journey I took. But as the gentleman who introduced me mentioned, it is predominantly about the people I met along the way. That turned out to be the true treat. But we'll walk through this, and at the end, I am happy to answer any and all questions. That's my favorite part. I love answering the questions. So hopefully we can do that. As mentioned, my wife and I retired from Southern California to South Carolina right at the beginning of COVID. We got out here in March of 2020. We bought a house on a lake called Lake Greenwood. We'd never seen the house. We took a flyer, and fortunately for us, it worked out. Well, fortunately for me, since I talked my wife into buying the house. So that worked out really well. I was not a birder when we moved here. I was a naturalist light, if you will. I'd been camping and hiking and whatnot my whole life, but I was certainly not a birder. And our first day here at the house to see what we bought, we were in the backyard with the real estate agent, and this bald eagle flew across the lake and landed on this pine tree right on the water's edge. And I managed to snap this picture, and I thought, man, this is a nice start. Everybody loves bald eagles, and this is a pretty cool start. One of the few birds I could identify at the time. And I really do wish I had been a birder earlier. My wife and I have been fortunate enough to I have gone to all 50 states at least a couple of times in probably 35 or 40 countries. I can only imagine the number of birds that I've seen that I didn't realize, and the number of birds I could have seen had I been looking. You know, when we travel now, obviously I'm looking for birds, but once I got into it, which I did pretty quickly after we moved here, I knew that I wanted to write a book about it. I love to write books. As was mentioned, I've published, I think, 50 some odd books since 2017. And, but I'm not a scientist or an ornithologist, so I wasn't 100% certain what I could write about. And then my son happened to mention, and I'm sure that most, if not all of you have seen this, the movie The Big Year, which came out in 2011. And so we sat down to watch it again as a family. We'd watched it in 2011, but not because of the birds, just because we like all the actors that are in it. And as we watched this, I had this idea for a big year. I thought, well, that could be kind of cool. Now, if you remember the movie, the Owen Wilson character down there in the lower right wound up getting divorced over his big year. So when I mentioned to my wife that I was thinking about doing a big year, she said I should really think about the Owen Wilson character. So I backed up a little bit. And in my birding, I discovered early on that I love raptors far and away more than other birds. With no disrespect to the other birds, I get that people love hummingbirds and shorebirds and gulls and warblers and corvids and everything, or covids. And so I just happen to have been fascinated with the raptors. So I did a little research and discovered that there are 53 raptors that call the lower 48 states home. And that, well, that seems to be reasonable to me. Although in my ignorance, I did not realize how difficult it would be to track down some of the winter owls. So that is why the trip was actually 17 months, because I had to go back in the second winter to gather up a couple of those owls. So among the things I was surprised to learn of the 53 generally accepted raptors is that there is no generally accepted definition of raptor. There is of warblers, of gulls, of hummingbirds. Science and ornithologists agree on what those definitions are, but they do not for raptors. And so I am reminded in 1964, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart was asked to define pornography. And he said, I cannot define it, but I know it when I see it. And I think that's kind of the way it is with raptors, is they are difficult to define, but we generally all know them when we see them. Now, I included the vultures in here because, again, when I was doing my research, they were included on almost every list. I will tell you that if I was to do this again, I would not include the vultures. Whatever the accurate definition of raptors is or will become, I don't think vultures meet it. I think vultures are extremely valuable. They might be our most valuable birds for the cleanup work that they do around the country, but I don't think that they are raptors. And there's controversy among other birds as well. You look at a Harlan's hawk, which is a subspecies of a red-tailed hawk. That bird has already been lumped and split 3 times. It is currently split out, or I'm sorry, it is lumped in with the red tail. It is considered a subspecies. There's a group of people that are trying to get that changed, split it back out again and make it its own species. So if you find yourself up in Montana or Wyoming and you see a Harlan's hawk, make sure you note that if you keep an eBird list, so that one day you might wake up with a little extra tick on there. And then there are some birds that I'm not really sure if we should count them as American birds. Down your way, the hook-billed kite, which is more of an occasional visitor from Mexico. They do breed here sometimes, of course. And then if you turn around and go north, you've got the northern hawk owl, the snowy owl, the great gray owls. Those are really more Canadian than they are US, but this is the US, so we claim all of them. My canvas was the lower 48 states. If you think about Alaska, there are no birds that are endemic to Alaska that we don't get down here in the lower 48. Obviously, they get some vagrants coming across the Bering Strait, but there's nothing there. If you think about Hawaii, they have 3 raptors in Hawaii. They have the barn owl, which is the same as our barn owl, same animal, no problem. They have a short-eared owl. There is work being done now to split that out from our short-eared owl here on the continental U.S. There are differences in the vocalization and in the hunting habits. They're more of a pure diurnal than our crepuscular short-eared owl here in the States. But who knows? And then Hawaii does have one endemic raptor. They have a hawk that lives exclusively on the Big Island, and I can only imagine how much time they invested in this, but they named it the Hawaiian hawk. And so I've been there looking for it, haven't found it yet, but it was not part of this project. So there are, of the 53, 20 of them have been found in all 48 states. Now, when I give these stats throughout the presentation, just so you know, I'm using eBird numbers. Most of us use eBird, and certainly all of us have access to it. And so that is what I use. And the numbers are from a 5-year block, from 2017 to 2022. I wrote the book in 22, so I used the 5 years previous. And in the 5 years previous, 20 of the 53 birds had been found in all 48 states. Two birds have been found in 47 of the 48 states. They have both skipped Louisiana. I don't know if they don't speak French or if they don't like Cajun food. But the northern goshawk, which is now the American goshawk, and the northern saw-whet owl have not been spotted in Louisiana. Now, interestingly enough, I had a conversation a couple days ago with Scott Weidensaul. Most of you know about Scott. And we were talking about this very thing, and he was saying that the original name for the northern saw-whet owl, and Scott's been studying them for 30 years, was the Acadian owl, and that's because John James Audubon claimed that he saw it and painted it in Louisiana. And Scott gently points out that Audubon was perhaps an unreliable narrator, and he doesn't believe that Mr. Audubon saw a northern saw-whet in Louisiana. However, the claim was there. The name has now been changed. One bird has been in 46 of the 48, has skipped New Mexico and Arizona, and that is the snowy owl. And that has been spotted in 46 of the 48. And it's also been seen, of course, in Alaska, and it has been seen in Hawaii, most recently in 2011. Although they killed it because it was on at an airport and they were afraid it was going to cause a plane to crash. But no New Mexico and no Arizona. It has been seen in Texas. And 5 of the raptors are typically found in 3 states or fewer: the Aplomato falcon, the ferruginous pygmy, the whiskered screech, the hook-billed kite, and the white-tailed hawk. And as I'm sure all of you know, all 5 of those are most easily found in Texas. So that is where I spent a lot of my time looking for those birds and had a great time doing so. Texas was one of the 2 or 3 states I visited the most over the 17 months. People ask about my trip and how that went. I made 7 cross-country trips. I did 13 round-trip flights. Now those flights, because I went to so many small towns, Wise River, Montana being one, Harlingen, Texas being another. Coming from the Greenville airport in South Carolina, you've got to take a lot of legs of flights to get somewhere. So anyway, 13 round-trip flights was 50 legs. People do complain about the airlines. Frequently it's justified. But for me, all 50 of my flights took off on time, and 49 of the 50 landed on time. And the only one that didn't was going from Houston to Harlingen. It was a late night flight, about 10:30. Got on the plane and flew to Harlingen, and we got right over Harlingen, and the pilot came on and said, "Hey, we got a little problem out here. There's a lot of fog down below, and we're not sure we can get underneath that fog. And so we've got about 15 minutes worth of fuel left, so we're going to fly around, see if we can land. And if not, we're going to turn around and head back to Houston." I'm not an ornithologist, a scientist, or a mathematician, but I did know if it took 45 minutes of fuel to get here, we needed 45 minutes to get back. And the pilot figured that out and came on a couple minutes later and said, what I meant was, we have 15 minutes worth of fuel to play with. We have plenty to get back to Houston, which is what we wound up doing. The only flight that didn't land on time. Got there the next morning. It was my 4th trip to Texas, combined driving and flying. And I finally got on a hook-billed kite. You guys probably see them all the time. I do not. So that was very exciting for me. I was on the road for 25 weeks. I visited 34 states. I traveled over 100,000 miles. These are the states that I drove to most often: California, Montana, Texas, and Florida. These are the states that I flew to. These are the states that I visited some combination of driving and flying. And this was my only faux pas in all of my driving. As I mentioned, I went over 100,000 miles. I bought a new truck for the trips, and I did all of them by myself and never had a problem, never had a breakdown, never ran out of gas, never had a flat tire. I was spectacularly lucky. And the only hiccup was I was in Kalispell, Montana, looking for a snowy owl that had been seen there 3 or 4 days in a row at a small little airport outside of Kalispell called Flathead Lake Sky Ranch Airport. And I flew in, got there Monday, looked Monday afternoon. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I looked all morning and all afternoon and never got on it. And Friday, I just thought, you know what, I need a break from this. And I knew there was a great place to look for raptors about 2 hours outside of Kalispell. So I got up early and drove there, got there just as the sun was coming up. I stayed for 2 hours, 120 minutes, and I saw 119 raptors, not counting vultures. It was amazing. And when I was done, I typed in Manning Street on my GPS, which is the main dirt road alongside this tiny airport outside of Kalispell. And it said, you know, you're 2 hours away. Here you go. That was great. I clicked go, turned on my book on tape, and just started driving. And every once in a while I would say make a left or make a right, and I would do that, but I wasn't paying attention. I looked up, I was in traffic, and I was staring at this sign that said, "Welcome to Canada," which was due north of where I was, not east the way I needed to go. And so you can't turn around once you get that close to the border. So I got up there. I expected just to say, hey, I made a mistake. I just need to make this 100-yard U-turn and head back. And we hear a lot of conversation about how great Canadians are and how kind they are. I did not find that to be true. They spent 3.5 hours tearing my rental car apart, looking for, I don't know, guns, drugs, something. So finally, at the end of 3.5 hours, they let me put my car back together. They gave me a little sheet of paper, said, make your U-turn, show this to the U.S. border guards, and they'll let you right back in. That turned out not to be true either. 2.5 hours they spent tearing my car apart. They didn't trust me or the Canadians. Finally, I got back in the United States. All of that because I didn't have my passport, because I never expected to leave the country. And I raced back to Kalispell. I got there about a half hour before dark, and I saw a car up on the side of the dirt road. And as you guys know, if you're out trying to get on a bird that's unusual and you see a car or more than one car on the side of the road, they've either broken down or they're on the bird. So I drove up, parked behind him, knocked on the window and said, hey, is there any chance you're on the Snowy? And he said, do you mean this one right here? And 50 feet away, sitting on a shed, you can see the top of the shed in the bottom of the picture, was this absolutely gorgeous snowy owl. And I think this is just a spectacular picture, not because I took it, don't misunderstand, but because this bird was so, so beautiful. And I got to watch it for about 20 minutes. And then finally, just as it was getting dark, it took off and flew and started hunting over at the airport. But that was absolutely quite a trip. And I still made it and got to my airport and got my flight home. The next bird is a ferruginous pygmy owl. And again, you guys are Texans. I'm telling you stuff that you already know. But the best place in the country to find ferruginous pygmy owls is the King Ranch. And the King Ranch is magnificently large. It's 825,000 acres compared to the entire state of Rhode Island, which is 777,000 acres. But I set up to take a tour there. And, you know, the ranch itself, they have hunting, they have corporate retreats, they've got all kinds of stuff. And they've got birding trips, but you can't do it on your own. You've got to take one of their tours. So I did. And on that tour was a mother and son. The son was a 20-year-old ornithology student at UC Davis out in California, and had his mom with him. They were both birders. And we get in this van before the sun comes up, and we drive out on the property. And after about an hour, we hear a ferruginous, but we don't see it. And I'm trying to avoid herd only. And a little while later, we saw one, but it wasn't a great look. And after we'd been out there about 3 hours, the guide said, hey, let's stop and have breakfast. So we pulled up in the middle of some grasslands, and there was a picnic table there, obviously their normal stopping spot. And We got out, and as we were setting up at the picnic table, I looked up, and about 20 feet away was this magnificent ferruginous pygmy owl. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous bird. It stayed through the whole breakfast. We were there probably 30 minutes, 20 to 30 feet away, and this bird stayed there. It preened, it dozed off a little bit, but it never left. And when we were done and we loaded up and we were opening and closing the van doors and doing all that, it never went anywhere. It let us take all the pictures we wanted. It was really a cool deal. On that same trip is where I got my white-tailed hawk, and which is a beautiful bird. That was a lifer for me. That was just stunning. And I learned on that trip, I did not know this beforehand, that this hawk has a nickname of Firehawk. And apparently the reason is, as it was explained to me, is that when you guys have those wildfires going through your grasslands or through the prairies and the smoke comes up, obviously the insects are doing their best to escape the fire and the smoke. And so they take to the air and fly. And these white-tailed hawks have learned to follow the trailing edge of the smoke and pick off the grasshoppers and whatnot that think they've just made it to freedom. So they have a nickname of a firehawk. The gentleman, the young man that I met when I was at King Ranch mentioned to me that if I have trouble getting on a spotted owl, he had done an internship the summer before. We had met in March. And his job was to find spotted owl nests and identify them for the timber company that he was working for so that they can cordon off a quarter-mile square area and not take the lumber. And so he said, you know, I'm pretty sure I can contact somebody there and they can help get us on a spotted. So I called him in the summer and I said, you know what, I could use the help. I appreciate it. And he was kind enough to drive 3 hours out. We met at 5 in the morning. And we hiked up a hill about a mile in the dark. And there wasn't really a trail. It was kind of a deer trail, if you would. And we get there just as the sun is coming out. And he says, okay, I think if we make a right here and hike out about a half mile, I think we'll get on a spotted owl. And I looked, and it was a wall of flora. I mean, it was a forest, so there were trees, and there were bushes, and there were plants. There, I couldn't see how we could get through. And we've been hiking mostly in the dark. And as it was getting lighter, I see he reaches down to his right thigh and unstraps 2 machetes that he'd brought with him. And he handed me one, and he took one, and we chopped our way through. And we wound up coming out into this roughly 60-foot round area, almost like a horse arena. It seemed so perfectly round to me. And right in the middle of it was this stunning spotted owl. And so just as we had done with the ferruginous, we sat down to have breakfast, and we got to watch this guy. We saw it drop down and get a mouse and eat the mouse while we were there. And again, like the ferruginous, it preened and whatnot and was just gorgeous. And after about an hour, we left. We hiked back out. And when we got back to the deer trail, we found this waiting for us, a fledge. And the fledge was not there when we had started our hike in the morning. And the gentleman I was with, his name is Frank Fabro. Frank thinks that the bird fledged while we were in the forest. And we found a second one. So there were 2 of these little fluff balls, and they are so freaking cute. It was just so spectacular. What a gift. It was an amazing thing to be able to see an adult and a fledge. The first chapter of the book is on swallowtail kites. I wrote a chapter on each of the 53 birds as I found them. The first one was a swallowtail kite. And this was a fun one. My son was here. Well, he lives here. He lives in the guest house. And we'd taken the pontoon boat out in the middle of the week, in the middle of the afternoon, in the middle of the lake, shut it off, lit up a couple of cigars, and we were just lying on the benches in the boat. And as we looked up, 2 swallowtail kites came by, and I managed to snag this shot, and excuse me, and we watched for a while. And when we got back to shore, I got on eBird and looked. First time these birds have been seen over the lake. And so I called a couple of people I'd gotten to know in birding, and they came racing right over, and we took them out and got them on the swallowtail. And that was the day that we came up with the name for the book and the concept and the whole thing. And that was significant to me. And so that was why swallowtail kite is the first bird in the book. Now, we do get them about 75 miles away from here pretty often. Just last month they left, but we get swallowtail and Mississippi kites. And Generally, there's about 25 swallowtails, about 15 Mississippi, and it's a mixed flock. And one of the farmers has been talked into not tilling his field under until after these guys go through on their migration, and it's just filled with grasshoppers, so they get to eat absolutely as much as they want, and it makes for great photographs. You get all kinds of shots. Rocky Mountain National Park, this is a boreal owl. So I wound up getting 4 small owls at Rocky Mountain National Park. I was introduced to a guy named Scott Rashid, and this was in 21. We become friends. I just saw him last month. National Park. I'm working on a book on mammals, and I went out to do some work for the with the elk, and I got to do some banding with Scott and got to see more boreals and more saw-whits. But Scott is a small owl expert. He spent the last 28 years studying them. He's written 4 or 5 books on small owls, and has just devoted his life to them, which is really cool. So through him, I got on the boreal, a northern pygmy. I got on this is a northern pygmy. This is a shot I just inserted. This is from just this past January in Yellowstone. This northern pygmy, but he put me on the boreal, the northern pygmy. He put me on a northern saw-whet, which is right here, and he put me on a flammulated owl, all within a matter of days. And I've been back 4 or 5 times with Scott, and we see different owls every time, but it's really a cool thing. And if you're not familiar, by the way, it's not easy to tell the difference between a northern saw-whet and a boreal. At least to me, it's not. There's a lot of similarities. But the easiest way, and I just saw him a couple weeks ago, and this was confirmed, we caught 1 boreal and 1 saw-whet within a half hour. If you look at the saw-whet, it's got a black beak or a charcoal beak. And if you look at the boreal, it's got an ivory beak or a tan beak, or some would say a white beak. And so there are other differences, but those are in my view, those are the easiest ones. Cooper's hawk is next on the list. This is at a place called Commissary Ridge in Wyoming. And up on this ridge, they have a banding station and a hawk watch in the fall. And so I was given directions to get out there and invited to participate in both. So I drove from here to Wyoming, and I got to where it was supposed to be, and I absolutely couldn't find it. And I wasn't really sure what to do because there's no cell phone service. And I spent over an hour trying to find this dirt road that they had told me I needed to go on, and I couldn't find it. And it was Thursday, and I knew that they worked 6.5 days a week without cell phone. They only came down Wednesday afternoon. I wasn't going to wait a week for them to come down. I wasn't certain what to do. So I kept driving around a little bit, and finally I found this beautiful wood gate entrance into what appeared to be a cattle ranch. And I let myself in and closed the gate behind me. And I drove down maybe a mile to this magnificent 6,000 or 8,000 square foot timber built house. And the front doors themselves were remarkable. They're probably 10 feet high, 2 doors that swing open. And they were about 4 foot wide each. So I knock on the door, and one of the doors slowly opens, and standing in front of me is this woman who was somewhere between 50 and 150 years old. She did not weigh 100 pounds. She looked to me like she was made out of leather. And she smiled and lit up the entire valley. And before I could say a word, she said, "I'll bet you're looking for those birds, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "About once a month, somebody shows up here and wants me to help them find the birds. So here's the deal. You got to come in and have a glass of milk and a sandwich with me. And when we're done having a conversation, I will put you over there." So that's what we did. Came in, and she told me some stories about living on that ranch by herself, by the way. And I sat there with her for an hour. I still couldn't tell you if she was 100 or if she was 60. But what a charming woman, and extremely friendly. And she got me where I needed to go. And right as I got there, they had just caught this Cooper's hawk in the banding station. And so they allowed me to hold it and then let it go. It didn't fly very far off, so I was able to get the pictures. And I love the Cooper's hawk. I love the orange eye. This Cooper's hawk is from a spot in Arizona. You can't see it because I didn't catch the bottom part of the picture, but it's got a live squirrel in its talons. It had just picked the squirrel off. I was out hiking somewhere in the morning in Arizona outside of Phoenix and got to see it pick the squirrel. and then flew just a few feet away and sat there. And people always ask, why do you prefer Raptors over everything else? And one of the reasons is the eyes. I love the eyes of Raptors. That orange and black eye is just spectacular. Next one's a red-tailed hawk. One of our most common raptors in the country, not counting the vultures. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We're going to talk about them. So I'm going to tell two stories about red-tailed hawks. One of them, most of you, if not all of you, will know. But if you see a movie or an ad or a TV show, and there's a bald eagle in that show, and they let out that fierce war cry, that, of course, is not the bald eagle. That's the red-tailed hawk. Bald eagle has a very weak, high-pitched call. It sounds more like something that should be hunting than the actual bald eagle. And so you may not have heard of this, but in 1951, there was a movie called The Distant Drum. And it was the first movie where they showed somebody getting shoved off the top of a tall building. And you've all seen that thing where, they got their back going to the street and their arms and legs are flailing. And the man or the woman is screaming as they go down. The point of view of the camera is looking at them from the sky on down. And there's this amazing scream. That's called the Wilhelm scream. And that scream is still used today, 75 years later. It's passed around among sound engineers because it was just a perfect scream. So it's been in hundreds of different movies and whatnot. I have been told, but I've not been able to verify, that there is a sound clip of the red-tailed hawk cry that gets passed around among sound engineers, and that's the one that we hear most often. I do not know if that's true because I haven't been able to validate it, but I'd like to think that it is, that there's an equivalent of the Wilhelm scream floating around somewhere. Now, the red-tailed hawk population began to explode in the late 1950s. In 1952, President Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected. And one of the things that Eisenhower wanted to do was to build an interstate highway system. He wanted to do that for two reasons. One, because following World War II, so many people were moving from the East Coast to the West Coast to start new lives and new ways of living. And the other was, in building those highways, he could build long, straight, high stretches where bombers or fighter planes could land, God forbid, if we got into a war with Russia and needed to do so. The unintended consequence of that highway system, which, by the way, started when he was president and finished in the early 1990s, obviously long after his death, but 40 years later it was done. The unintended consequence of that, or one of them, is that it created perfect red-tailed hawk habitat. You took forested land throughout the country, you cut it down, you created these small grasslands, which are generally mowed and taken care of. So it's great habitat for small birds and reptiles and amphibians and little mammals and all kinds of stuff that red-tailed hawks love to hunt. The only thing that was missing were perches that they wanted to hunt from. And so what we did is we put up tens of thousands of telephone and power pole, telephone line poles and power poles across the country. And those are absolutely perfect red-tailed hawk perches. And so the population of red-tailed hawks exploded. It continues to grow. It stays stable. It's really, really a spectacular thing. And you can find them in all 48 states, and you can find them all over in all 48 states. This particular one is this fall from our front yard. We have a bird sanctuary, and we don't get them all that often. I see maybe one a month, but we do get red-tailed hawks flying over, and this one happened to fly by, and I was able to shoot it through some beautiful colored leaves, and I love that shot. Another bird that has benefited after almost being wiped out by humans is a peregrine falcon. Now, they were a victim of DDT, as were the bald eagles and brown pelicans and a number of our larger birds, where the DDT had caused their eggs to weaken, and we nearly wiped all of these birds out. The thing that made saving them possible was it was a single issue. If you look at birds now, and we've gone from 10 billion birds to 7 billion birds in less than 3/4 of a century. We do that because they crash into windows because of light and feral cats and cars and habitat loss. With peregrine falcons, the problem was the DDT. So when we eliminated the DDT, the falcons made a comeback. And they are now known in a number of places around the country as the urban falcons. And the reason for that is this: peregrine falcons are cliff nesters. They love cliffs. The straighter up and down, the better for them, because it discourages animals from climbing up or climbing down into their nest. And of course, peregrines will take on anything that flies, so they're pretty safe there. So there is not a major city in the United States that does not have peregrine falcons, including in the Northeast. They populate everywhere. And they're doing that for two reasons. One, because skyscrapers resemble cliffs. So peregrine falcons think this is fantastic. And two, because most large cities have a large pigeon population. And that is a favorite food of peregrine falcons. And there are so many, it's easy, very easy for them to catch them. As a matter of fact, it's begun to change their behavior in that they nest much closer to each other in the cities than they do in the wild, because they're not worried about a food supply. And so you have a number of large buildings throughout major cities in the country that are building peregrine boxes. We have a Carlton Ritz here in Atlanta, which is about 3 hours from me, and they invited me over there when they were building it. But they built on their 50th floor, which is their ballroom floor. They built a peregrine falcon nesting box. So that's a pretty cool deal that's happened and that they're coming back. This next shot is from a place called Torrey Pines, which is outside of San Diego, and it's a small cliff right along the beach. So you can see the cliff in the background. In the foreground, if you could see it, is the beach, and there's only about 50 feet of sand in between those two. And the cliffs themselves are only about a half-mile long. And there's a peregrine falcon nest every year on the north and the south side of that cliff. They literally live that close together, which they don't do in the wild normally. But there are so many seabirds, so many shorebirds for them to hunt, that they just don't seem to care. And every year they come back and breed, and they're usually successful. They have a very high fledge rate. So that's a pretty spectacular thing. And then this bird also benefited by the banning of DDT, which is the bald eagle. This shot is taken at Conowinga Dam. If you don't know Conowinga Dam, it's on the Susquehanna River, 45 minutes northeast of Baltimore, Maryland. And in the fall, the shad run, and the bald eagles collect by the hundreds right over the dam, because the shad go through the dam. Nobody cares about them like they do salmon, so they're not building steps or anything for them. And so a lot of them get killed or knocked out. And as you know, bald eagles are surface hunters. They don't dive in the water. They grab off the surface. So they're there by the hundreds to gather up these shad and that have been knocked out or killed. And so in the time when that's happening during the shad run, it's very cool. The dam itself is locked all year round except during this period, and they allow birders and photographers to come in. They've got a walkway right along the river, maybe 20 feet above the river, and then there's about a 3-foot chain link fence. And I've been there a number of times, and you can just set up, and I bring a chair and a lunch, and I'll get there at dawn and stay until dusk, 2-3 days in a row, depending on how much time I have when I get there. And you can shoot these birds all day long. There's a couple of juveniles that are fighting. This is a bald eagle that's just taken a shad out of the water. And this particular shot that you're looking at here, which again, I think is a great shot. And again, not because I took it, but you can shoot this shot hundreds of times in a day if you're there. I mean, it's a great place to hone your skills. It's a great place to get bald eagle shots. And it's truly a magnificent place to go. If you ever get a chance, go in the fall and you'll have a blast. Another large collection of raptors is at Sebastian Inlet, which is on the east coast of Florida, about 45 minutes north of Vero Beach. And again, in the fall, you're looking at a mullet in this picture. The mullet run. Now, this is saltwater. The Susquehanna River obviously is freshwater. This is salt. And you get not hundreds, but you do get dozens of osprey, and they fish and hunt all day. And I think there's a possibility. It's certainly a good debate to have with anybody that wants to have one, but I think they might be the coolest of all raptors. And I will share with you 3 or 4 reasons why. Number one, they have a pure sushi diet. Sushi is my favorite food, so I'm a big fan of osprey doing that. Number two, they are the only bird in the world that carries a lunch with them when they go on migration. So almost all birds, when they're getting ready to migrate, try to double their weight. Some of them reduce or even eliminate some of their internal organs, and they finally believe they've got enough energy to make the flight, let's say the 650 miles across the Gulf of Mexico. The last thing an osprey does before it takes off on that flight is grab one last fish, flip it head forward, grab it with its talons, and take off flying. And while it's doing its long migration, it'll just tuck its neck in like a swallowtail kite does with a grasshopper and eat that fish along the way, which is pretty cool. They're also the only, not just raptor, they're the only bird in the world that when they migrate, they regularly do not return the first year. So you have a rough season of osprey in this country of early March to mid-September. And when those birds take off and go down to southern Mexico and South and Central America, they do not return 6 months later like almost every other bird for the first year only. They stay. And then they cycle back through 12 months later and spend the rest of their life on a regular migration system. Ornithologists cannot agree yet on the reason that happens. It might be that the living is easier there, but then when they hit sexual maturity, they're driven to come back to the States by testosterone or estrogen or whatever it is that drives birds to do that. But that's something they're studying, and it's a pretty cool thing. The other thing that ospreys do, and they're the only raptor that does this, is their eyesight adjusts for refraction. So they can dive at 60 or 70 miles an hour, and they can dive up to 2.5 feet, some say 3 feet, and they can hit that bird because their eyesight adjusts for refraction. Bald eagles, for example, don't have that refraction adjustment, so they do not dive hunt. This is another osprey from Sebastian Inlet. It had just finished hunting and was drying off. This is a great gray owl. This is from Yellowstone National Park. It was minus 25 degrees at the park. For those of you that are photographers, if you are in that kind of weather, you have got to leave your windows down and your car heater off. Because otherwise, if you go to open your car door, your camera fogs up instantly and you're going to lose whatever shot you're trying to grab. So I was by myself. I go every January to Yellowstone. And in this particular day, it was minus 25 degrees. So I was cold. I had 1.5 inches of snow on the floorboard of the car. And a ranger actually helped get me on this great gray owl. I got stopped by a ranger and he asked what I was doing there. And I told him, he said, you know, you're the only guest in the park today compared to, say, a summer day at Yellowstone where they have 17,000 cars. I was the only car they had that particular day. But I got to see this great gray owl. I got to see it dive a couple of times. And if you've not seen that, that's magnificent. They can hear small rodents up to 2 feet under the snow. They can hear their heartbeat. And so you're looking at this perfect, beautiful, virgin, flat snow. And suddenly a great gray owl dives down and comes up with a small mammal. It's pretty remarkable. If you do love owls and you want a chance to see some of the great winter owls, go north to Minnesota to Sax-Zim Bog. Sax-Zim Bog in the winter is the owl capital of the country. There's a couple of great horns that were up there. But on a given day in Sax-Zim Bog, if you have a great day, you can see 7 different species of owl. Great gray, boreal, snowy, northern hawk, northern saw-whet, barred, and these, the great horned owls. You can have the best time ever at Sax-Zim Bog. Now on this particular day, not on this day when this shot was taken, but the day where I got to see 5 species, not 7, but 5, it was minus 36 degrees. It gets just a little bit chilly there, so you have got to dress in layers. People ask me if I chased rarities. I do. I chase raptor rarities, and that's it. And of the 3 that I've chased, 2 of them are down your way in Texas. You guys had a roadside hawk there recently. And so I managed to get down and see that. And you had a couple of years ago a bat falcon, which I'd seen a ton of times in Central California, but never in the US. And that was pretty cool. This next picture is by far the worst picture of the entire slideshow, or the worst picture that I share anywhere in any lecture or presentation I give. But I think I'll explain. When I explain, you'll understand. This is a Steller sea eagle. This is up in Maine. This is a mile away from what's called the Arrowsick Bridge, which is the main place you could see it for the 2 winters it was there. I went up both winters to see it. And you look up the river, it is literally a mile away, and that's where the bird hung out 2 winters in a row. This particular shot, what you're looking at is the stellar sea eagle, the side with the white wing, and what it's standing on is a Canada goose that it took out of the air. I mean, imagine how big of a bird you have to be. And that bird in front of it that looks like a crow is a bald eagle. A stellar sea eagle is 50% bigger than a bald eagle. A good size adult bald eagle is 13 pounds, and stellar sea eagles are routinely over 20 pounds. They're massive birds, and to see them flying, or it's an amazing thing to watch. And you think about it, bald eagle is an apex predator. They're used to when they fly in, everybody else leaves, vultures and crows and whoever else is around there. This particular day, this particular shot, there were 13 bald eagles in the area, and they were down eating this, picking at this Canada goose after the eagle had killed it. And when the eagle dropped down, all but this one took off. They just zipped up into the trees. And no one knows what's happened to the eagle now. It was seen this winter in Newfoundland and Canada, but it did not make it back down into the States, or if it did, it wasn't seen. So there is a hope that it is still alive. And there's even some talk that maybe it breeds with a bald eagle, and we get some sort of hybrid bird. But we'll wait and see what happens with that. Northern hawk owl. This is the 53rd and final bird of my trip. This was in Wise River, Montana, and so I was struggling to find one. I'd just been up in Montana the week before to get my gyrfalcon, and I came back home. And I had scheduled a trip for the following week to go to Sax-Sim Bog, even though one hadn't been seen there yet that year. But I just had to go look for it somewhere. And I got a call, and somebody said, hey, there's a northern hawk in Wise River. But they wouldn't tell me where. It was the oddest thing. They called, but they didn't want to give me additional information. So I jumped on a plane, flew back to Montana, rented a car, drove 4 hours to Wise River, and I pulled up late in the afternoon. And before I could even get to the town, and by the way, it's a tiny town. It would have to get a light to be a one light town. But just before you get to the town, there was a dirt road off to the left. I thought, well, I'll poke around and see what I can see. And then I'll go check into my hotel and stuff. I'd allowed 4 days to look for the bird. I'm driving down the road. I see 2 cars on the side of the road. It's about a 15-foot wide dirt road. And sure enough, I pull up behind them, and they point to the top of this telephone pole, which was no longer being used. No wires attached. Excuse me. And sitting at the top of it is this northern hawk owl. Magnificent bird. Got to watch it for probably an hour and a half. This is one of the times it dropped and went hunting. And it was just gorgeous. Dark came. We all left. I went back the next morning at sunrise. There was nobody else there. I pulled up, and sure enough, that bird was there sitting on that pole. I got out of my car, dressed for the cold. It was below zero. And I just leaned against my car for 2 solid hours, and that bird stayed on the pole for 2 solid hours. It did not drop down. It didn't hunt, and it just kind of stared at me. But it was preening. It didn't seem in any way stressed. And suddenly, the bird dropped down from the telephone pole, and when it got about 1.5 feet above the dirt road, it turned 90 degrees, so it was now flying across the road. It flew straight at me, and with its left wing, it brushed my left leg. Now, it had no reason to do that. I mean, the bird obviously knew I was there. I'm 6 foot, over 200 pounds. I'd been there 2 hours. For me, I believe it was a spiritual thing. I absolutely, in the bottom of my soul, believe that bird was saying goodbye. It took off, and it flew across the field. And I spent the next 2.5 days looking for it and never saw it again. But I got this picture, and that's why this is on the cover of the book, because I fell in love with this bird. And again, there could be any number of scientific reasons why that bird brushed against me, though I haven't heard any theories offered. But for me, it was spiritual, it was magnificent, and I was thrilled. If you're interested in the book, you can get it on Amazon, RaptorQuest. My name's Scott Harris. 2 other things I want to point out. I have a book that's going to the publisher in a couple of weeks, although it doesn't get published till spring of 27, called Why We Love Birds. I interviewed 52 birders from around the country, and a lot of them are names you're familiar with: Cy Montgomery and Ken Kaufman and Pete Dunn and Greg Miller and Scott Weidensaul, and just amazing birders telling amazing stories. So I was able to write a chapter on each of those great birders, and that has been an absolute blast for me. And if you're at all interested, I have a podcast called Naturally Scott. I interview a lot of those same people. It's not all about birding. Tomorrow, I interview a guy who has spent his lifetime studying whale sounds. And so it's just naturalist stuff. It's about parks and birds and mammals and scientists. I've got a guy coming on who's an expert in underwater volcanoes, just because I think it's interesting. And if I may be so bold, if you have a moment and you go to YouTube and look it up at Naturally Scott, hit subscribe for me if you would. The more subscribers we get, the more we get the message out there and the more people get to see it. There's no ads or anything in the show. There's no cost or anything. And it allows me to get more guests to come on board and allows me to share the stories with more people. So again, I would really appreciate that should you choose to do that. I have a rule about my photography that I don't, other than cropping and slight color adjustments, I don't tweak my photos. If there had been a wire in front of this ferruginous hawk, I don't take that out in Photoshop. Other people do, and that's fine. I just don't believe in it. So in this particular photo, this was taken outside of Pinnacles National Park in California. That is a ferruginous hawk. That is the color of the sky behind it. It was setting on that crossbeam on a power pole, and there was that yellow sign nailed into the power pole. The one thing I did change was that sign used to say high voltage, and I changed it to thank you, because I want to say thank you guys very much for listening to me this evening. And it was a pleasure to share these stories with you. I hope that you enjoyed them. And I know I enjoyed sharing them. And I would be absolutely thrilled to answer any and all questions that you guys might have. So I will turn that over to whoever it is that might facilitate or monitor the questions. Thank you.
As you can see, Scott, the lights here it's just a very dark room, so nobody can see at the moment. Any questions? Yes.
I have two questions. What kind of truck did he have that he put all those miles on?
Ford F-150 King Ranch.
Yeah. What kind of camera setup do you use for all
I carry two cameras when I'm out. I carry a Sony A1 with a 200 to 600 lens, and I carry a Sony A9 with a 70 to 200 lens. And I do that because obviously sometimes the birds are closer and sometimes they're further away. But I'm also a big fan of mammals. So in the last few months, I've been to Yellowstone and Jasper National Park and Africa and whatnot. And you've got to have a camera that can shoot those big animals close up. And so, like if you can see behind me the elk, that's from a couple of weeks ago. It was rutting season at Rocky Mountain National Park. And so I went out to shoot the elk rut. And for that, I'll use the 70 to 200 lens, but I carry the other one on my other hip. At the same time, my wife says I carry a rifle and a pistol. And I will tell you, I think Sony makes the best camera out there, and I think Ford makes the best truck. But honestly, I doubt that there's a difference between a Ford and a Chevy, or a Sony and a Nikon, or a Sony and a Canon. It's just kind of what you want to use. When I started birding, I was not a photographer, so when I decided to start shooting, I was able to buy from scratch. I wasn't heavily invested in it. I wasn't invested in any lenses. I didn't have a camera. So I understand that people that have had, a DSLR or something for years and they've got 7 Canon cameras, it makes sense if they're going to get a mirrorless to get a Canon so they can keep using the lenses. So while I swear by Ford and I swear by Sony, honest to goodness, it could just as easily be Canon and Chevy. Not Dodge, by the way. My son-in-law is a Dodge guy and he's out of his mind, but it could certainly have been something else.
Listened to one of your podcasts, and I was that you would like to point out?
A favorite of my podcasts? Well, shit, that's that's a tough one because we've posted 22 of them so far, and I wouldn't want to slight 21 other people. I will tell you the podcasts average 45 to 60 minutes. But the ones that we posted this week, the one with Scott Weidensaul, Scott and I got to talking, and we wound up talking over 3 hours. We had to turn it into 2 podcasts. Scott is an amazing storyteller and just kept saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going so long. Can I tell you one more story?" And then the next day, I interviewed. Maybe you've heard of Peter Kastner. Peter is the only man in the world who's seen 10,000 birds, and I interviewed Peter, and we ran over 90 minutes. And so they're good storytellers. And I've been blessed. Cy Montgomery was a terrific guest. Greg Miller, who was he was the Jack Black character in The Big Year. They based it on Greg and his life. He was the very first guest we got. So he holds a spot in my heart for sure because he was the first one that was kind enough to say yes. And now we're at the point, it's like in the top 10 podcasts in the country already after 22 shows. So that's about 10 or 12 weeks. And I've just been blessed by the people that are willing to come on and be a part of the show. I really feel honored and I enjoy the conversations. A number of my guests are already scheduled to come back and be on the show again early next year, either because they've got new books coming out or because we didn't have time to talk about everything. So many of these people have been doing this for 50 or 60 years. You can't squeeze that into an hour. There's just not enough time.
Any other questions?
No. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We,
Thank you, Scott.
Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys very much. Have a great evening. Good luck birding. And I apologize for not moving to Texas when I drive through.
That's okay. There's too many people here now.
And a lot of them are ex-Californians.